I want to thank everyone for tuning in to the 25th Hour Radio Show here on Monster Radio AM 1150 and 98.5 FM WGGH. I am your host, Rob Fairless, and on the phone with me today is a retired naval aviator who has been both a Top Gun graduate as well as an instructor. He has also served as a senior Pentagon official, working as Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis' speechwriter and Chief of Communications. He's an author, and he's currently the CEO for Defense Analytics, a national security and foreign policy advisory firm specializing in strategy development, government policy, and technology adoption. He's a rock star if there ever was one, if you ask me. I'm talking to Commander Guy Snodgrass. Commander Snodgrass, thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day to be a guest on the show.
You bet, Rob. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Well, Guy, let's start this interview off the same way I start off all my interviews. Let's talk about your beginnings. What inspired you to become a part of our United States military? Was it all about flying in the beginning, or did that opportunity present itself later?
I think it was probably about flying initially. As a kid growing up, I grew up in Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas, and we had an Air Force base nearby. We had a Navy base nearby. And of course, every summer you'd have the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds come roaring overhead. I was a Boy Scout at the time, so we'd always had our annual fundraiser there. And I think that instilled in me just this, not only an awe and a fascination in aviation, but also just this desire to want to pursue that kind of opportunity. And then, of course, as I got older, as I actually wound up going to the Naval Academy, which was the path I took to become a naval aviator, then you realize, the flying is really cool. I'm not going to downplay that one bit. It's a blast. But the people you're working with, the chance to serve your country, at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about.
So as I just mentioned, you are a Top Gun student as well as an instructor. Two parts to this question. For those who might not know, what exactly is Top Gun, and how good do you really have to be a part of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Top Gun is an actual real place. There was a really, of course, famous movie from 1986 by the same name, spelled a little differently, but that popularized the school. But it's an actual real place. At the time of the movie coming out, with Tom Cruise and everybody else, it was based in Miramar, California. As you got into around 1996, it moved from California to the mountainous area, kind of the high desert of Fallon, Nevada. So that's where I went through as a student. That's where I became an instructor and stayed for the next following years. So, the school itself really exists, as we say, to teach the teachers, right? So you collect some of the best and brightest men and women from around naval aviation. You put them through an incredibly taxing and very difficult flying course, everything from, mission planning, which is where you get ready for your flight to prepare for success, the flight itself, both aerial combat and taking missions which are air to ground, dropping bombs or firing the Gatling gun from the fighter jet, and then the debrief. And so all of that gets kind of smashed together into a 12-week course that they do 3 times a year. And I mean, look, I feel very privileged to have been there. And I would tell you with all humility, that's part of the school, is to make sure that you do seek to attract the very best and brightest, the very best pilots and aviators from around the United States Navy and the Marine Corps, because that's a part of the Navy. And so you bring them in and you basically take whatever natural skills they had and you make them 5 times, 10 times better so they can go back out and now teach the rest of the men and women in the U.S. Armed Forces.
Look, I know this is serious training you were involved in as both a student and an instructor. But man, I can't imagine there being too many things that would be more exhilarating than piloting a fighter jet. What was more enjoyable, being the student or the teacher?
Gosh, that's a great question. I'll tell you, when you're a naval aviator, it's so much, you take so much for granted. I remember coming home I actually served during Operation Iraqi Freedom. That was my very first kind of what we call an operational deployment, where I went overseas in the Persian Gulf, spent about 7 months there, and then came home. And of course, to your family, they're like, my gosh, I can't believe you did that. Thanks for your service. That's amazing. And for the person like yourself, who's just doing it, it's just your job. So you don't necessarily think it's anything special. But yeah, I'd tell you that piloting the jet is absolutely a blast. And the thing that makes being a Top Gun student so just exciting is that for that 12-week period, you focus on becoming the best aviator you can be. So they don't want you messing around with anything outside of work. So that's really kind of nice, because the instructors do all of the administration work. They handle all the the things that have to get done to get to and from the jet and everything else. I mean, you just focus on eat, sleep, and fly. And that's what I thought was great about being a student. But yeah, I mean, being an instructor, you knew you were kind of at the top of the heap as far as you knew the material so well that you could obviously teach it to others. You had access to some of the very best and brightest around our nation, whether it's working with the Air Force, working with Navy SEALs, working with all sorts of really talented people. And I think that it's hard to say which one would be better, but I think they both definitely had some pretty cool aspects to both paths, both as a student and as an instructor.
Have you ever been involved in a tight situation, or for lack of a better word, scary situation where your Top Gun training pulled you through it?
100%. 100%. I mean, and not even just Top Gun training. I'd say the training that all aviators receive is about staying calm and remaining cool under pressure, because you can't go into combat and face adversity and suddenly lose your mind, right? I mean, that's the worst thing you could do. And I've had, in fact, in my most recent book called Top Gun's Top 10, I detail in a chapter about how when I was a student going through my naval aviation training, my right engine exploded and what that was like. And I even say in there, hey, it's about aviate, navigate, communicate. And that's the priority you have to take things. So you have to make sure that you're safely flying the aircraft every single minute of the flight. The second thing you can do, the second in order of priority, is to navigate to get to where you safely need to be. And then the last thing you've got to do is communicate, whether it's talking to someone who might be in the aircraft with you if you're in a two-seat plane, or talking outside the plane. But that's one of those lessons people have learned the hard way, is that sometimes you focus on the unimportant thing, like talking on the radio to tell someone you've got a problem, and the whole time the plane's heading right towards the dirt, and you don't want that. So I thought that was the great thing about both Top Gun's training, which really took what I'd already been given and hined it to a very fine point. But that is just being able to focus on the main thing at any given moment and not letting your emotions get the best of you.
So I was about to mention your newest book, the Top Gun's Top 10 Leadership Lessons from the Cockpit. In your own words, what type of person is this book geared towards, and how would you summarize the contents?
I would say it's very widely placed. I want it to be something that I could either hand to a high schooler, or someone who's a mid-career professional, or someone who loves, the armed forces or aviation. I mean, I want it to be something that was approachable and readable by darn near anyone. Because when I had written my first book, I realized it was very specific in nature. It was talking about, what it was like to work with Secretary Mattis, what it was like to be around President Trump. And, that's very specific to that moment in time. But what I really wanted to do with Top Gun's Top 10 was to put information out there that everyone can benefit from. And like I said, when it came to some of the things that I took for granted as a naval aviator, well, look, I mean, it was like a 24 years process of just leadership training, personal development training, being able to work well with others. And I realized that gives us so much of a leg up in the real world, in civilian life, and in a company, I mean, in your community. And I wanted to be able to take what I thought were the 10 most important lessons, the lessons I've seen very successful people from across all types of life that they tend to have in common, and write them in a way that was fun and enjoyable and kind of ties back to my experience as a Top Gun instructor. So that's what I sought out to do, and wound up putting the words down on the page, and it's had a great reception. I've been very honored because of that.
I've talked to a lot of authors on the show, man, and I think I asked this question here to pretty much all of them. And it's kind of weird asking you this question, knowing the stressful situations that you've been in, but I'm still going to ask it. Is it nerve-wracking knowing that in this day and age where feedback is almost instantaneous when a product is released, do you, as a retired commander in our United States Navy, ever get anxious over how the general public might receive one of your books, even though it does have a 5-star rating on Amazon?
That's a great question. I would say it's funny. It's yes and no. I'd say in general, no, not really. I mean, I love feedback. That's something that was the hallmark of naval aviation. And for a lot of elite military forces, a lot of elite, professions have that same type of a mantra where, look, you got to get the feedback. That's the only way you learn, you improve, you get better. And I can tell you right now, I mean, I took some punches on my first book because it was a little bit more politically based and biased and seen that way. It's hard not to in this day and age. And so I learned a lot from that experience, right? And so I took all those lessons learned and I fed them into this second book. And so I think that's why it's done even better. The other element of it is that, sure, I mean, anytime you write about something that's deeply personal, that you feel very strongly about, you kind of throw it out there in the wild and say, gosh, I really hope that people find value in this, that they say, yes, the way you see the world is of benefit to me. And so I think if there's any kind of nervousness, obviously you wouldn't want to throw out there people to raise their eyebrow and be like, what is this guy thinking?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a pleasure. Anytime you get a chance to write stuff, you put it out there. And I'll tell you, the biggest benefit I've seen as an author or as someone who, I'll periodically write for magazines or, online, or go on TV and do some stuff. And you just meet the neatest people. And sometimes the people who reach out to give you the feedback, they come from all walks of life. You strike up a great conversation and you learn something new. And that's the thing I really enjoy the most about it.
Now, do you have any upcoming projects you're working on right now? Any new books on the horizon?
Well, I do. I mean, in fact, it's kind of funny. I think I'm going to change gears a little bit. I grew up as an absolute incredible techno nerd. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I was a nerdy kid in high school. I loved computers. I loved building them. Back in the mid 90s, there was something called an electronic bulletin board system. When you had dial-up modems, right before AOL became the big thing, you could actually dial up into someone's computer and they'd host a website or basically that. I've been involved with computers for such a long period of time. I'd studied artificial in college and in grad school. And it's something I've been, working with periodically for the last 25 years. And so now it's like the hot new thing. So I think it's twofold. In my day-to-day job, I love working with companies who are navigating innovation, digital transformation. What is in the art of the possible? What can we do with this digital transformation and all this data we have? So that's been a lot of fun to help guide people through those transitions. But I think that's also going to be kind of the nexus for my next book is to take a little bit of a forward-looking view at what America could look like, say, 15, 20, 30 years down the road as we master AI. What's it going to allow us to do? What's it going to allow us to overcome?
What about personal life, man? Do you still fly? Do you own your own personal aircraft?
I don't own my own plane. My father-in-law actually does, and so it's fun to go up and fly with him. But it's funny, when I was actually stationed for a period of time at a place up in Newport, Rhode Island, called the Naval War College, and so I'd gone there to get a degree. And a friend of mine was actually an Air Force B-2 bomber pilot, and he has his private license. And he's like, "Hey, come on, man, let's go flying. It'll be fun." And I tell you what, I was bored. You're flying at like 80, 90 miles an hour. I mean, the scenery was great. Don't get me wrong, but I found myself instantaneously missing having two jet engines at your command and the ability, if you got yourself into trouble, to just add power and get out of trouble. And so I kind of laughingly say that I haven't really gotten too much into the civil aviation side of the house because I just know that I would get myself in trouble and I would no longer have the ability to get out of it. But especially I've got 3 young kids, and as they get older, I think that's something that I definitely would love to instill in them, is that love for aviation, take them up flying and teach them what I know.
What about hobbies and things like that? I know you also have a podcast you like to do.
I do, yeah. So I've got a podcast called Holding the Line, which is actually that title of my first book as well. Kind of focuses on a broad array of topics. I mean, everything from technology to personal finance and leadership. So I've enjoyed doing that for the last year and a half or so. I also, frankly, at the age my kids are at, I love spending time with them and just being more available. That was one of the biggest reasons my wife and I made the conscious decision to kind of step away from uniform service in the Navy and seek other ways to serve and to have a little bit more of a stable family life. So, it's nothing too exciting. It's everything from just linking up with friends, doing sports, reading books and going running tend to be my personal outlets.
How did you get the call sign Bus?
Well, a lot of times with call signs, so the first rule of a call sign is that you never get to pick your own, right? So it's something you get assigned. And when I walked into my very first squadron, brand new guy, day one, they took one look at me because at that point in time, I was about 145 pounds, soaking wet, just this string bean of a white kid. And they started calling me Bus because it was basically about as far different as you could get from a football player named Jerome Bettis. This is a period in the 90s early 2000s when the Pittsburgh Steelers were winning Super Bowls and doing great. And so Jerome Bettis was the running back for the Steelers. And they're like, man, we couldn't think of a guy who is more different than Jerome Bettis than Guy Snodgrass. So that's how I got Bus.
What about social media, man? Do you do social media, or would you suggest my listeners check out your website for up-to-date details?
Yeah, no, I mean, both of those are great. I love social media. I love it when people reach out. So yeah, you can find me on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as well at Guy Snodgrass. And like you mentioned, I do have a website, guysnodgrass.com. there's a page on there where you can contact me if you want to reach out that way as well.
Well, sir, we're almost out of time here on the show. Is there anything you'd like to finish up with? Anything you'd like my listeners to know that I failed to mention?
No, nothing that you failed to mention. I just want to say thanks again for the opportunity. Like I said, I've met so many just amazing people throughout this journey. I'm glad to count you amongst them. And just want to say thanks. I know you've been doing this for some time now, and thanks for the service that you're doing.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Commander Snodgrass, it has been absolutely fantastic having you as a guest on the show today, sir. You made my day, brother. Thank you so much for taking time to do this.
Hey, anytime. Thanks, Rob.